Hello, I'm Kirsten Pilatti, CEO of Breast Cancer Network Australia, and welcome to the Challenges of Work and Breast Cancer, our webcast specifically for those people who are in structured organisations. We have another two webcasts to follow, one being on for people who are self-employed or in small business, and another for senior executives. So we really hope that you'll get as much as you can out of the webcast tonight. I would like to pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are with us this evening, to the elders past, present, and of course our future leaders in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander programs. So tonight I have got two very special women with us who have helped us from the very beginning of the work and breast cancer program. Robyn Batson from the Sussan group and Tarishi Desai from the McCabe Centre, and you'll hear more from them first. But first I wanted to talk about how we got to where we are tonight and what you'll hear about for the webcast. So what we will cover today is your rights and responsibilities, and Tarishi will take us through that. Then Robyn will talk more specifically about how this work and these rules and legislation actually can work for you in practice. Then we will talk through some different scenarios, and at the end we will leave you with some top tips to help you get through work and breast cancer challenges. So I want to tell you that this has really come about because of the needs of our members. So in 2017, we looked at what were the gaps in services and care that existed around the country through our State of the Nation report. And the challenges of work and breast cancer came up in nearly every single one of our consultations around the country. So today, this webcast is really for you and looking at what we heard were some of your challenges and hoping that we can help you get through. So I'm going to pass to you, Tarishi, and maybe it's best if you introduce yourself, but first of all, before you do that, I want to thank you for your incredible commitment that you've had to BCNA and to so many people with cancer around their rights and responsibilities to be in their workplaces. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll get you to do a quick summary of who you are as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kirsten. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here, so thank you for the invitation. As Kirsten mentioned, my name is Tarishi Desai, and I'm a Legal Research Officer at the McCabe Centre for Law and Cancer. We're based here in Melbourne at Cancer Council Victoria, and the aim of the McCabe Centre for Law and Cancer is to use the law to effectively prevent and control cancer. And so the work I do focuses on the role of law in cancer treatment and supportive care, including issues related to access to treatment, obviously the protection of rights of people who are affected by cancer, the regulation of health practitioners and services, and the regulation of health information. So really thrilled to be here today, and what I'll be doing today is giving you a high-level overview of some of the key legal protections in the workplace if you have breast cancer, as well as what your responsibilities are as an employee. I'll be discussing key rights and obligations under employment law, equal opportunity law, and workplace health and safety laws. I'll also briefly discuss how to deal with workplace issues like discrimination, bullying and harassment, and we can tease out these issues in more detail in the case scenarios. So I wanted to start by saying that work is a really important part of the lives of many people, and understandably, if you're diagnosed with breast cancer, you might be wondering how that diagnosis is going to affect your capacity to work. And the decision you make about work will be impacted by many considerations, including the type and stage of your breast cancer, the associated treatment and side effects, your personal circumstances, your financial circumstances, the kind of work you do, and how flexible and supportive your employer is in assisting people with breast cancer. People's circumstances are different. Not everyone with cancer will make the same decision about work, and that's okay. There's no right decision when it comes to this. You just need to do what's best for you. And this may involve deciding to continue working through your treatment. You may take some time off. You might decide to have a leave of absence and then return to work when you've recovered, or you might decide to retire altogether. You may decide to do one or more of these things, and it's important to know that you have certain workplace rights that can support these decisions, and that employers have an overarching duty to ensure the health and safety of all their employees. This involves creating a workplace environment where people feel comfortable in making these decisions and exercising their workplace rights, and includes but isn't limited to having well understood and well practiced workplace policies and processes to support these decisions. And I'm sure Robyn will talk about that a bit more. So what are some of these key rights and protections that you have? Taking leave from work may be one of the first things that someone diagnosed with breast cancer may need to do, and leave entitlements are a key legal protection for ill employees. The National Employment Standards provide 10 days of personal or sick leave and 4 weeks of paid annual leave per year for permanent employees. Casual employees aren't typically entitled to paid personal annual leave, except in certain circumstances, for example, if that's provided for in an enterprise agreement that covers your employment. These are minimum entitlements, and your employment contract or any relevant enterprise agreement or industrial award may provide for greater leave entitlements than these, so it's important to be familiar with the terms of your employment. Employees can take as much personal paid leave or annual leave as they have accumulated. You may be asked to provide a medical certificate if you take sick leave. That medical certificate doesn't need to state that you have breast cancer, but employers can ask for further information if they feel they need it. Employees can also use any long service leave they're entitled to and unpaid leave if that's available. Importantly, employees are legally protected from being fired if they decide to exercise their right to take their sick leave, and typically you can't be fired whilst you're on sick leave. If you are, this could be an unfair dismissal, and there may be some range of remedies available to you. The same applies if you're on unpaid sick leave for more than for 3 months or less, and you have provided your employer with evidence of your illness. If an employee is on unpaid sick leave for more than 3 months in a year and their employment is terminated by the employer, that dismissal is not automatically unlawful. So being discriminated at work because you have breast cancer or you have had breast cancer, you're at a higher risk of developing breast cancer is unlawful under both state and federal laws. And this includes protection from direct discrimination. So this is where a person with breast cancer is treated less favourably than others because of their breast cancer diagnosis or cancer history. So the most obvious example would be if you told your employer that you have breast cancer and then you're shortly dismissed or you're demoted to a lower paid job because of that. The second form of discrimination is known as indirect discrimination, and that occurs when an employer's condition or policy or practice seems on the face of it fair but is actually unreasonable and disadvantages an employee with breast cancer because they're not able to comply with that rule because of their illness. So an example would be if there's a requirement that retail employees have to spend most of the day standing. A person returning to work after breast cancer might find that quite difficult because of the side effects of their illness, such as fatigue. So employers need to consider whether the conditions they're imposing are reasonable, and if they're not, they could be discriminatory. If a formal discrimination complaint is made under these laws to relevant human rights commissions or tribunals, then a range of outcomes may occur, and that could include the employer being required to make changes to their workplace practices to prevent discriminatory conduct from occurring in the future. To avoid discriminating against an employee, employers must consider whether any reasonable adjustments could be made so that the employee can fulfil the essential requirements, or sometimes known as the inherent requirements of their role. Employees with breast cancer are entitled to have reasonable adjustments made for them so they can perform the essential requirements of their role. And these may include changes to the workspace, so changes to equipment, desk chairs that they're using, or changes to workplace practices. So, for example, working from home or working part-time, gradually returning to work, taking some time off for medical appointments, having more breaks during the day, or performing some other temporarily agreed duties and so on. There are some limited exceptions to this requirement. So employers can actually lawfully discriminate where the employee is unable to carry out the inherent requirements of the role even after or even if reasonable adjustments are made. They can also discriminate if the reasonable adjustments would impose an undue burden or an unjustifiable hardship on the employer, and this decision is typically based on a number of factors, including the employee's role, the adjustments that need to be made, their particular disability, the financial circumstances of the employer and their size, the impact it will have on the business and others, but it's also the consequences to both the employee and the employer of not providing those reasonable adjustments. And lastly, workplace discrimination can be considered lawful if the discrimination is necessary for the employer to comply with other legislation, including occupational health and safety requirements. And importantly, employers aren't required to create a new role for an employee, so the reasonable adjustments requirement doesn't extend that far. The protections against unfavourable treatment and discrimination under the Equal Opportunity Law, which I've just discussed, are also reflected in our national employment law called the Fair Work Act, and these are called general protections. It's unlawful for employers to take adverse action against an employee because they have breast cancer. So, for example, by discriminating against them or treating them unfairly in some other kind of way, including deciding to take sick leave that they're entitled to. It's also unlawful to be pressured into resigning or dismissing you because you have breast cancer. And if that happens, it could also be considered an unfair dismissal under the Fair Work Act. However, if that adverse action is due to a reason other than an employee's breast cancer, for example, employee misconduct or other performance issues that are unrelated to your illness, then that adverse action may still be lawful. General protections complaints under the Fair Work Act are becoming much more popular than complaints under discrimination laws, and this is because there's a reverse onus of proof when it comes to general protections claims. So the employee doesn't have to prove that they've been treated in a negative way. It's up to the employer to prove that they had taken this action for a reason that's not related to the breast cancer. There's also the opportunity to get financial compensation under general protections claims and for the employer to be penalised, which isn't the case under anti-discrimination law. Also, similar to the reasonable adjustments entitlements under equal opportunity laws, flexible working arrangements can be formally requested under employment law. The request must be made in writing. It needs to set out what the changes are that are being asked for and why, and the employer has 21 days to respond to that request, and it can only be refused on reasonable business grounds. And these grounds are similar to the exceptions to having to make reasonable adjustments under equal opportunity laws. Just briefly, workers have a right not to be bullied or harassed at work because they have breast cancer, and we have national anti-bullying laws to protect workers from repeated unreasonable behaviour that creates a risk to their health and safety. This would include unreasonable work demands, offensive or humiliating remarks, intimidation and exclusion. If the bullying isn't resolved by the employer, bullying complaints can be made to the Fair Work Commission, which can make an order for the bullying to stop. It's also unlawful for employers to treat workers unfairly or threaten them in any way because they have made a complaint regarding discrimination, bullying or harassment, or if they've lodged an unfair dismissal claim or are otherwise involved in a complaint. If you are concerned about discrimination, bullying or harassment, then first try speaking to the person involved if you feel comfortable with that and if you think that's appropriate. Often people don't realise that they've acted in a way that has caused you distress, or the employer may not fully understand what kind of reasonable adjustments you need. And many employers are really supportive and want to do what they can to help their employees. So it is important to try to talk to your employer. Workplaces generally have policies and processes in place to deal with complaints around discrimination, bullying and harassment, and most of these issues can generally be resolved through these processes or through some kind of mediated discussion or conciliation that's facilitated. If you feel that your employer hasn't resolved the issue satisfactorily, you can make a complaint to external complaint resolution bodies. This may include the Fair Work Commission if it's related to concerns about bullying, as well as leave entitlements, unfair dismissal. It could be to the Human Rights Commission in your state or territory if it's related to discrimination complaints, as well as the Fair Work Ombudsman for any complaints about pay and leave entitlements as well. Just to note that any complaints regarding an unfair dismissal must be lodged with the Fair Work Commission within 21 days of your dismissal. This is a very strict deadline. It's very hard to get extensions for this, so seek legal advice early if this is something that you're concerned about. So moving from your workplace rights to your workplace responsibilities, telling your employer that you have breast cancer is a personal decision. There's no law that says that you have to disclose that you have breast cancer, but you do have some obligations. You must tell your employer of anything that affects your ability to perform the essential requirements of your job or could reasonably cause a risk to the health and safety of yourself or to others. So for example, if the side effects that the medicines you're taking may affect your ability to do your job or may affect your safety in the workplace. There are also some practical reasons, as well as legal ones, as to whether or not you disclose your illness. One factor is that your employer can't make reasonable adjustments if they don't know that you need them. And likewise, disclosing this information can assist with any flexible working arrangements. Not disclosing a prior medical condition may have implications for any workers' compensation entitlements if your breast cancer is exacerbated or returns because of your work. But this varies significantly from state to state, as the laws vary significantly around workers' compensation in different states and territories. Disclosing information about your diagnosis may have some other benefits as well. So it can reduce the risk that any changes in your work performance are considered as poor work performance. And keeping a diagnosis a secret may cause you unnecessary stress. If you do decide to disclose, then your employer does need to keep that information confidential, and they do need your consent to tell others about your illness and treatment, unless it's a health risk to others, in which case they may be able to disclose some information without your consent, but only to the extent that it's necessary to reduce that health and safety risk. So that brings me to the end of my formal presentation. I know we've covered a lot, but I'm looking forward to discussing these issues further following Robyn's presentation.
Thank you very much, Tarishi. That was amazing, but as you said, so much content. So the best thing is that because we're on a webcast, people can go back and hear it again. So we would encourage you to do that. So next up, we have Robyn Batson, who's the Group People and Development Manager at Sussan. Sussans have been long-time partners of BCNA. We joined in a partnership in 2005 and continue to grow every year. And we're so thrilled, Rob, that you have been such a key element of this project, but also that you continue to support us in every way that you can. So what we want to do now is really talk about the practicalities of how work and breast cancer from a business perspective. So
fantastic. Thanks, Kirsten. And I think, as Kirsten said, we have been a long-term partner with BCNA, and we're so proud of being able to support with this particular project and developing the resources and support for you around work and breast cancer. We've had a number of experiences within our workplace, which I just wanted to share today, what some of those are and how we've approached those. So I think, what's really important from our perspective is that every situation has been different. And we have 4,000 employees across our group, and we've had experiences with young people across all age groups, and we've had experiences with both females and males. And I think what's important is that your particular needs may be different to a previous experience that the employer has had, or the employer may not have actually ever had to deal with this. So that's really important to understand, and for the employer to understand that every situation is different. The support we've provided has really depended on the workplace and the location of that. We've obviously got stores with customer interfacing roles, and then we've got our head office. So we've had to look at each situation differently, understand our team members' specific needs, and then what can we do to work through and provide that support. And I think for us, we've heard about the legal side today and your rights and responsibilities, which is really important. But for us, it's also about the importance of our culture and providing that supportive environment for our team members. So operating within the legal framework, but equally it's about being able to think outside of that. So for us, we have policies and processes, but in these situations, we've also had to say, well, maybe we have to think outside of that because of the specific situation. And I guess for us, it's about focusing on what the team member can do rather than what they can't do, because there's always something that can be done, and it really helps then to identify what that support is. I think what's really important for us and with our team members, though, is that open communication is crucial for us. And I'll talk a bit about privacy and confidentiality, but I do really believe that through the process in your journey, that open communication, if you can have that, is really important. So whether that's with your manager or whether it's with your HR person, because I really believe through that then it's about being able to identify solutions and being able to come up with appropriate strategies to support you within the workplace. We've heard about flexible work, but what does that really mean? For us, it's meant a whole range of different things. It might be about changing your hours of work. It might be being able to come in a bit later because you might find that you want to be able to sleep in a bit more in the morning. So for us, it might be, instead of saying to be at work at 8:30, maybe it's about 9:30. So really thinking about what are the hours and are there some adjustments that can be made there. Is it about being able to work from home and have that combination between home and the office where practicable? It might be about change in employment status. So for us, we've had full-time team members who have then asked if they could step down to a part-time or a casual position to have a bit more flexibility, or it might be a part-time role stepping down to a casual. So we've looked at each of those situations on their individual basis to see what we can accommodate and what adjustments we can make within the workplace. We've heard about leave. So really understanding what leave you can access, so whether that is your personal leave or your annual leave. Often team members don't think about the long service leave or understand, and it is, different in each state once again. And sometimes because of an illness, you can access it a bit earlier than what you may be aware of. So it's important to really look at all of your leave options. Asking for leave of absence, it might be that you really feel that I just need 3 months or 6 months or 12 months out of the workplace, and we've had all of those scenarios where we've really approved that leave of absence so the team member knows that they've got a job to come back to when they're ready. Or it might be about taking unplanned leave to go to doctor's appointments, so being able to go out in the middle of the day or at the end of the day to attend appointments. So for us, flexibility really can mean a range of different things. So it's really thinking about what does that mean for you and what support can the employer give in that area. The other thing, and we've heard about, confidentiality and privacy. I think in these situations, in our experiences, there is an impact on the broader team. It's important for you to think about, do you want the team to know? And as an employer, it's about respecting that. And it's important understanding that often work is important for you to have some normality at a time when there's a lot of other things going on in your life. So as an employer, we have to respect that confidentiality. But I guess with our experience is that the team are often aware something is going on and they do want to provide support. So I suppose in considering whether you want others to know or not, it's being mindful that others will often sense that something is going on. So if they're not aware, they may ask other questions because they're just not sure what's going on and they care for you. So I think that's an important consideration. And for us, we've also found where there's customer interfacing roles, being in retail, our team members in stores have really good relationships at a local level with customers. And we've had to manage through that because the customers may be coming in when a team member is absent and asking, oh, where's Sussan? We haven't seen her for a period of time. So I guess when you're considering these things, depending on what organisation or role, it's really being mindful of whether you've got internal and external customer interfacing situations and how that gets managed as well. Returning to work after an absence. So if you've had time out, and it could be a short period of time, it could be a longer period of time, I think it's helping your employer understand that even then you may have some good days and you have bad days. So it's being able to manage through that. And also there may be some difficulty, whether it's physically or emotionally. So the importance of regular catch-ups is, from our experience, important in terms of having that dialogue with your manager or once again with HR so that they can support you in that return to work after being out for a period of time. I think the other thing that's important is if you are having time out of the business, agreeing with your manager about how you stay in touch or what information or communication you may want in that time so you don't feel disconnected, and that your manager or the HR person once again is just hearing and knowing where you're at and that staying in touch process is happening. I guess if you're encountering difficulties at work and it's really trying to think about how to navigate through that, try and be open and transparent with your manager or your HR person, because I think, as I said before, that open dialogue is really key to being able to provide that supportive environment. Really identify what support you need in the workplace and being able to provide or explore some of those options with your manager to help them understand what they can do to support you as well. It may be that it's about temporary changes, it might be about discussing your workload or changing some of the tasks that you're doing. And I think what's really important in all of this is you may have a plan, but the plan can change. So it's really being able to have that open dialogue, because sometimes it might be, well, for the next 3 months, this is what we think it looks like, but it may change. So I guess our approach has not been to always have formalised plans. It's been about trying to keep that dialogue and that fluidity to be able to support the person. But in some organisations, a plan is important, but it's also being, I suppose, understanding that things may change along the way and how you navigate through that. We've heard about reasonable adjustments, which are really important. So it's important to understand the legal aspect of that, but it's also important that if you're asking for some adjustments, that you keep in mind that your employer may need some time to work out how to balance your needs with the needs of the workplace and the impact on other team members. So for us, it's about that open dialogue, working through it, thinking of what your needs are, but then overlaying it with what does that mean in the team environment, so how can we work through that together. So it's important to be able to identify what assistance you require. I've talked about that the plans may change, but that open dialogue is key, and is there other support that's required? I think the other thing that's really important through this, and the BCNA resources really help, that sometimes if you feel that you can't have that conversation with your manager yourself. You may need to get someone else in there to assist you with navigating through that. So it's really sometimes identifying, is there other support I need to have discussions? Is there other support I need in the workplace? And how can we try to work through that together? For us, and Kirst said, we've had a long partnership with BCNA, which we're so proud of. And through this and with our own personal experiences within the workplace, we've been able to connect our team with BCNA and its resources. And I think that is so important that you have that connection, access the resources. There's resources that are available for yourself, your manager and your team. And we've certainly found that that's been really helpful in these situations. The other thing now is that there are other apps available to identify how you need, with the help that you can get. And there's one that we're starting to use, which is about Gather My Crew, so that if you really need support, you can use those things to identify what support and connect with your friendship group and get what you need. And these things enable you to ask for the assistance you actually need. So I think it's really important that you tap into those other resources to assist you.
So Rob, we'll stay on this, but before we move into the scenarios, a couple of things I wanted to say is certainly from the feedback from our members is about how do you manage coming back into the workforce after you've been on treatment and stopping other colleagues looking at you with pity in their eyes. So what kind of advice do you give to the teams around the woman or the man who's been diagnosed?
I think once again the situation has been different. I think it depends on the relationship that the individual has got with the team. But I guess the broader advice, and respecting each individuals, is that when the person's back at work, they just want to have normality. It's important that you're not asking them questions unless you've got that relationship that allows you. So we have had to do some coaching with the broader team. And that's why I come back to, if you've got some open communication, it makes it a bit harder, easier to have those discussions with the team about when this person's back, they just want to come and do their job without everyone feeling sorry for them. That work is an important place for them. So they know you're there if you need the support, but please be mindful and not be asking them personal questions every minute of the day.
And please don't make them some spaghetti bolognese, because
Correct.
As we know, that's what everyone drops off on the doorstep.
Correct.
Well-intentioned friends, we call them around the show.
I think for us, with some of our scenarios, we've been able to come up with really practical support where the team could help the person outside of work, and being able to navigate that. And I know I've played a role in that by having a conversation with the individual around what else can we do, and then giving the team some practical things to do has really helped as well.
Exactly, because everyone does want to help, but we also need it to be in a way that's best for the woman or the man who's going through the breast cancer.
Correct.
So we have heard some pretty horrendous stories through developing this program, and Tarishi, I'm sure you have probably seen some of the worst in action legally. So what I wanted to do is just throw up 3 scenarios where it would be good for you to help us to give advice to this person who may be going through it on how to navigate the system. So the first is that a woman is diagnosed, has her treatment, and as a result of her treatment has severe lymphedema. She is a night packer in a supermarket, and because the doctors have said to her, because of her lymphedema, they don't want her lifting heavy boxes consistently over time. Tarishi, let's start with you. What are her legal rights and responsibilities in terms of informing her employer about her disability, if you like, as a result of her treatment? And then what advice would you give her?
Yeah, sure. So this scenario, raises issues around an employer's duty to make reasonable adjustments, and in order for the employer to do that, the employee would have to give the employer some information about her condition. The duty to make reasonable adjustments would apply regardless of whether or not you're a permanent or casual employee. Flexible working arrangements under employment law may apply, assuming that the woman is a permanent employee and has been with her employer for at least a year. As we discussed, the employer may contend that the reasonable adjustments that the woman needs once she has that conversation with her employer are too difficult for them to introduce. But it's really important that the employer does consider those adjustments and whether or not they're reasonable, and if they are, to put them into place, because if they don't, that's clearly unlawful.
So would an example of that be to retrain them as a someone who might be working on the counters and
I think the consideration there, if it's about a lifting restriction, even on the registers can be hard because you've got lifting in that scenario. So I think it's about exploring other options around, instead of working night shift, is there, are you able to change your hours to day? And then maybe it's more administration work or lighter duties, because at a register they're still having to lift heavy bags and things. So it's certainly about exploring that the night shift role is going to be about replenishing shelves and things, but how about if we looked at what are the duties that go on during the day, and are they happy to look at different days and hours, and then what are the other duties that don't involve the lifting side that could be accommodated.
Yeah, I think what the employer will need to do is look at what makes up the essential requirements of her current role, and are there aspects of that role, as Robyn's pointed out, that are more administrative or aren't as physically taxing, and to make some adjustments so it's those aspects of her role that she can focus on, or maybe they can think about job sharing, so one employee does the more physical aspect of the role and this employee can focus on the less physical aspects of the role. And I think what would be helpful would be to have a letter from the doctor explaining what she can do, what she can't do. That will help the employer, I think, make appropriate, reasonable adjustments.
Correct. So if you feel like you're getting nowhere in this scenario, what are the options open to you?
So it's really helpful to first of all, try talking to the employer. You can have a support person with you if you feel that's going to help. You can ask for an HR representative or an occupational health and safety representative to be involved in those discussions, because the employer does have a duty to ensure the health and safety of all their employees, and they have obligations under equal opportunity law. If it's just really not going anywhere with the employer, then the options would be to make a complaint under discrimination law. So that would involve making a complaint to the Human Rights Commission in the particular state or territory. They will then contact the employee, find out some more information. They will set up a mediation to try and resolve the issue through conciliation with the employer. There's no kind of set outcome from that process. It's really about discussing the issues with the employee and the employer and coming to some kind of agreed resolution. So that's certainly an option.
So what would be your top advice to this woman, Robyn, on how to navigate this complex?
Well, I think it's explaining, and yes, we need to have the letter from the doctor about what those restrictions may look like. If you can't work it out with your manager, then going to your HR person to really come up with a solution, and hopefully they can help resolve that matter. But certainly elevate it. This is what I talk about in terms of focusing on what they can do, because I believe, in most situations you can come up with a solution.
Yeah, and I think we want to try and go to the path of legal at the absolute last resort.
Yeah.
Another scenario which you both kind of touched on before is around privacy. So we've had a situation where 2 staff members in an organisation were both diagnosed with breast cancer. One wanted to tell people and the other didn't. And I guess, Rob, I'll throw to you first on this, because I think this is part of those cultural challenges for the managers and the team around them. What advice? How would you kind of deal with that situation?
I think, once again, you would respect what the employee is requesting in relation to that. I guess if I had 2 in a similar departments at the same time and one did want to disclose it, then I would be having that conversation with the other person to explain, understand it's important to respect your privacy, but it is important to understand that if we can't disclose it, others are going to be aware. You may notice differences, though others may be talking to this person in a different way because they've got that information, then really just not sure what's going on for you personally. I think what's really hard to, when as an employer you want to support and you want to provide flexibility, which may be different hours and flexibility, if team members don't have some of that context, it can create some other issues within that team environment because they don't have the context why one person has got some different flexibility. So I would still encourage people to have that open and transparent dialogue.
Yeah, at least within the HR team or...
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. It's really tricky. And we've seen this play out in that kind of sense of why is that happening to them and not to me?
Yeah.
And I think the other really important point that you brought out before was about how things change over time. So how you feel at that moment in time that you're diagnosed may be quite different to how you're feeling through radiation when you're having to leave work every day at the same time every day. I think there's a lot of challenges. Is there any quick tip you wanted to give, Tarishi, around this scenario where there's 2 women, same department?
Yeah, I think it is tricky when they're in the same team, but I completely agree with everything Robyn has said. I think it's really about respecting their wishes, but having that conversation to explain and discuss, the implications of disclosing, not disclosing. And the other thing is that if you choose not to disclose, then there could be a scenario where you have another employee who's very sick and comes into work when they should really be home at bed, and you want to send them home because they pose a risk to the health and safety of your employees who have breast cancer. And you can do that, but in order to do that, it has to be a reasonable request, and what makes it reasonable is explaining to the other employee that you need to go home because we have someone whose immune system is quite compromised at the moment, and so they would then need that information.
Absolutely.
They would need to understand why they're being asked to go home. So it's so important to be as open as you can be, I think, in these circumstances. But as Robyn said, to respect the decision that the employer has made and do as much as you can to ensure that you're fulfilling your privacy and confidentiality requirements. And I think just reiterating to the employee that there may be situations where you are going to have to give some information to other people because it is going to impact or potentially could impact the health and safety of your other employees and your teammates.
There's so many complexities that you kind of don't think about, the layers that are involved in this, and I think that's so important for all of our members to realise that this is not simple and there isn't that one out of the box policy that's going to cover all of us. So I guess that brings us to our third scenario, which is around the reality of work where you don't know when you're going to get breast cancer, and you may already be in a tricky situation with your organisation around your role. And let's say the scenario is that you're already feeling like you're being managed out of the business or being really focused on in terms of management. you go away and you have some time off to have your treatment, you're about to come back, but there's some real unresolved issues of work before your breast cancer. How do you kind of navigate that system of the issue that was already there has just been compounded by a breast cancer diagnosis?
Well, I think before we answer that question, I think one of the initial questions to have if I was that person would be, well, do I actually want to go back to this workplace? If you do, then knowing that there are going to be some issues that you have to work through. I think here the employer actually really needs to act very carefully because they could very easily have a general protections or discrimination complaint on their hands if they're acting in a way that you can argue is related to the breast cancer. On the other side, because there were some issues before the employee left, it could also be more difficult for a successful general protections or a discrimination complaint because the employer could say, well, these were management concerns, there's still concerns around poor performance or whatever it is. So I think this is a particularly complicated and tricky case, and I would really be seeking advice, legal advice in terms of discrimination and general protections complaints, but also advice from, an HR advisor about what's the best way for me to manage this? How can I ensure that I have open conversations with my employer, but also there are other tips there are other things you can do that can help you if it does get to the point where you have to make a formal complaint. So documenting the conversations that you're having with the employer, keeping any emails and things that they send to you about this, that can be really useful in working through these issues.
So, Robyn, what would, because
No, I agree. I mean, my first question would be, is it the right place? Is it the right culture to come back to? Because if there have been some management concerns, there's still going to be those sort of issues and conversations. And do I have the energy that I want to put into that? Notwithstanding, I mean, person's entitled to be there. But I think it is then working through that process and getting I would recommend getting some other external advice on how can I work through that to get the best outcome for me, understanding that the relationship is not as healthy as it should be.
So where would you send people to get that advice?
It's difficult because I'd like to think that within our organisation we could work through that.
Yeah.
But I guess if I was looking for external advice, we've heard, there's external, whether it's a lawyer, an external HR advisor, there are, places you can even call the Fair Work Hotline, discrimination. There are places you can call to get some advice on how to work through that. But I think it's important to seek that advice out.
Yeah, and don't be shy to do that.
No, you've got to look after yourself. So it's like if it's not going to work, if I really want to put my energy in to try and turn things around, how can I go about that? Or I've made a decision that maybe it's time to think about a different sort of workplace and role where I'm in a more positive culture.
Yeah. So I think that's a perfect place to end because it's amazing how quickly the time goes for these webcasts. So, Rob, can you take us to the next slide, which is our final kind of top tips, if you like, and thank you for putting these together. There are many resources that are available, but it's so important that you know your rights and that you seek support. So BCNA, our website, we have a breast cancer and work hub, which has information for employees, for employers, for small business owners and many others. So make sure you head there to the advice, and we've been very lucky to get great support from so many people for those resources, but also the Cancer Council around the country, 13 11 20, where you can get a national pro bono referral service, and that provides legal referral service workplace advice, financial planning and small business advice. And I know from many members who have used that they have really appreciated the very practical nature of that support. But I think there's a couple of key messages that came out of today. We need you to try and resolve any concerns quickly, and communication is absolutely the key. And I think being open and honest and looking for things you can do. I loved that, instead of things that you can't. So the next slide is just, thanks my assistant Robyn. So this is what the BCNA website looks like, where you can go for support. I finally want to thank, I'll just go to the next slide, Rob, just very good technical support, it's amazing. I want to thank all of our partners, to Baker's Delight, Burley, Sussan, Focus on Furniture, Red Energy and Reflex. All of them have helped to make sure that we can deliver you the very best in information, treatment and care. And my final slide is to thank Cancer Australia, who really help us to reach out to people in rural areas, because we know the further you move away from a metropolitan area, actually you have worse access to really good support and care. So from all of us, thank you very much. Make sure you reach out for resources. Thank you both so much for your fantastic work for us. And if there's anything else you need, remember you can call our helpline on 1800 500 258 and speak to our nurses, or access really important information through the Cancer Council's helpline of 13 11 20, and access as much support as you need. Thanks for joining us.